But fire is always an attention getter, isn't it? We notice when there's just a little bit of smoke in our air, and then we search for regular updates on what the fires are doing now, where the wildfires are, have they spread, are they more contained? We applaud the firefighters, we hold our breath, we pray for relief, and we agonize over our grieving, rapidly heating planet and our burning forests, as we saw so vividly on those slides earlier. We think about the people needing to be evacuated, some losing everything, along with wildlife and untold species of plant life destroyed by these flames that have such a voracious appetite. In our part of the world, even this morning, we shudder when there's a hint of smoke in the air. Even when a thunderstorm blows up, we fear lightning strikes because they can easily explode into a 0% contained fire in this tinder-dry environment. So, holy ground? How could such close proximity to fire be holy ground? Rather than take our shoes off, as Moses was challenged, we would rather grab our sneakers and run as far away as possible. Holy? We equate holy with wonder and sacredness and beauty, inspiration, and a host of words that are not fire. Fire is painful. We avoid it. We fear it. It feels like death to us. It is death for far too many trees. So I'm very grateful that Deanna has agreed to help us understand this fire and ourselves, how we interact with it, human intervention, and how that all works in with the health of the environment. So is there ever a time in which fire can be anything other than destructive?
Yes, definitely. Is this working?
I hope so.
I hope so. Okay, great. Absolutely. In those pictures, you could see that the rebirth is necessary. And for giant sequoias in particular, they're fire-adapted species, as are many of the conifers in the Sierra Nevada. So they need fire. It's absolutely essential for the rebirth of the next generation of trees. And if you've been up to Sequoia, which I'm sure many of you have, you see these giant sequoias with these massive burn scars in them, and they're still going strong. Unfortunately, today, the fires are burning a little bit too hot, and a lot of the management strategies, like the last slide that I showed you, are leading to increased fire intensity and frequency and creating conditions that are sort of counter to what we need to be doing. So we have some changing to go through to have the fires not be the way, not burn the way they are, so that they're so destructive. So it's unfortunate, but they're going to keep burning until we figure out what to do, basically.
So there is necessary fire?
Absolutely. It's absolutely necessary. I mean, we need them. It's just they've gotten too big, they're burning too intensely, and yeah, they're taking out too much of, but even in high intensity fire is good to a certain extent, but it's pretty clear right now that the front country of the west side of the Sierra is getting pretty, fire swept right now. So the best way to look at that is it's time to start again, and we need to learn, and we haven't yet. So hopefully we will.
I hope there are hopeful signs of learning.
Yes, very specifically, there is a grant that was just given to a series of scientists to study fire behavior in a way that they haven't studied it before. There are 3 things you need for fire. You need ignition, right? That's a big issue because 9 out of 10 fires are human caused, they're not lightning caused, so we have to think about what we're doing. So there's that issue. Then you need fuel, right? So that's the trees and the air, fuel, and I'm sorry, the last piece is air. So you have ignition, you have fuel, and you have air. And the issue that's been not studied, that they don't understand this is a problem, is that when you take things away, you introduce oxygen and airflow. So a whole brushy area is actually blocking the wind, and they have not factored that in at all with any of their calculations. So there's been a grant that CAL FIRE gave to a bunch of scientists to actually start looking at that, because it's a huge missing data point. So back to that last slide. The Forest Service might think they're making it better because look, they created this big opening, but they probably just introduced a whole new way for fire to get into that region. So we're right on the edge of the grant was just received 2 weeks ago.
Oh my, so that's cutting edge now.
Cutting edge, right. So hopefully, fingers crossed that we'll get this all sorted out, because we don't know what we're doing. Clearly, it's not working, right?
All right, some months ago, Rod and I stumbled upon the book, Finding the Mother Tree, Discovering the Wisdom of the Forest by Dr. Suzanne Simard, and you'll see it pictured on the screen. We listened to part of this audiobook when we were on vacation, and were astounded by it. I haven't finished it yet, but it's a fascinating read, even for those of us who are uninitiated. In conversation with Deanna in planning this morning, we realized that we both started reading this book and are in process of reading it. Simard, the author of the book, was born into a family of loggers deep in the British Columbian rainforest in Canada. And she is now the professor of forest ecology at the University of British Columbia. And here are a few words of summary about her work from Goodreads, and I quote, "Simard brings us into her world, the intimate world of the trees, in which she brilliantly illuminates the fascinating and vital truths that trees are not simply the source of timber or pulp, but are a complex, interdependent circle of life, that forests are social, cooperative creatures, connected through underground networks by which trees communicate their vitality and vulnerabilities with communal lives not that different from our own." End quote. Isn't that fascinating? So Deanna, how does that invisible underground network of roots and nourishment and communication help that entire tree community?
It's super fascinating. This is working, yes? Okay. Well, they communicate using this fungal network and bacteria. So you might have a mother tree, a large tree that has all this nutrients that reaches higher up, and it's going to send those sugars down into the root system, and then it delivers that to other trees via the fungal network plus bacteria. It's amazing. But what's amazing is that tree or those trees are not just nourishing their own tree species, they're nourishing other trees in the ecosystem. So it's like this communal network where they can warn each other, hey, fire's coming. They can send each other nutrients to try to fight off like a beetle kill. So, I mean, it's amazing. It's very symbolic. It's sort of how we should probably be functioning, right? Right. We need to take care of each other, just like the trees are. So when we're going in and we're cutting logging roads and we're removing this, we're disrupting that whole ecosystem, we are not helping the trees out, right? So we need to back off and rewild the landscape. But it's hard for us to do that. I mean, just to provide a little sympathy, we all want to do something. Right. What do we do? But the general methodology, again, is not entirely informed by science. There's a big missing piece, and they're not addressing that whole ecosystem that's happening in the forest floor. Like, it's just not part of the conversation. So hopefully we can bring it forward. I mean, we're trying, right?
I was going to ask, is it coming into the conversation?
Well,
or very, very sparingly?
We're getting closer with the air oxygen issue, because the grant was just given, so that's great, right? And it's CAL FIRE that gave it, so that's good. With the issues with talking about how to nurse the landscape back together, it's barely part of the conversation. It's barely. I mean, when I bring it forward in group discussions with forestry people, it's just, there's a lot of silence. So okay. We're not there yet. We're not there yet, but her work is going to be very helpful. And actually, I was thinking of contacting her to see if she might be willing to speak or endorse the proposal. Yeah. I just haven't. I need to finish her book.
Yes.
First. I want to honor her with that. Right?
Exactly.
So, Haven't finished.
As you know, we haven't spoken about all of this before, so this is great. But you know, it strikes me that we humans, we tend to turn to our Earth's resources and we say commodity, or we say property. We see them as that. We see them as something that we can utilize, and it would be good for us. But is it good for us? Meaning all of creation. We have assumed a posture of dominion over, rather than something of this community, and that's where that forest management comes in, right? That isn't always beneficial to the tree community. So in a 2016 TED Talk, the same author, Dr. Simard, speaks candidly about the resistance she encountered, and I heard a little bit about that from you, from the scientific community when she began publishing and speaking about her discoveries of this underground connection of trees. Taking this astounding discovery seriously through the logging industry with its clear-cutting and neat little plantation, threw that all into disarray. Because that's all designed simply for profit. There was resistance. And there is resistance. Has there been resistance specifically to your work? You talked about meeting very supportive people at the beginning.
That's a great question. Yes, there's definitely been resistance. I mean, it's a bold idea, so okay, we're going to take this huge area and we're going to set it aside, protected. Yes, that's a huge proposal. So it's just natural that people would resist that. But if we're talking specifically about, you know, some of these issues where you look at the entire ecosystem and think about how to nurse it together, resistance is coming by it's not part of the conversation. I mean, so we're involved in an endangered species lawsuit for the Pacific fisher, and the Pacific fisher is a cute little forest animal, lives in trees, needs big trees, and it needs an interconnected habitat. So I personally looked at 45 logging projects. This is basically, what did you do during the pandemic? This is what I did. It was not fun, no. But I learned a lot, and as you're looking through, you know, you see, okay, they're gonna spray herbicides over thousands of acres here, so they're gonna take out native brush species that should naturally regrow. They're going to, you know, build hundreds of miles of roads. I mean, there are all of these things that are built into these projects, and they're not included in the scientific evaluation, period. I mean, just not there. And so it was extremely frustrating for me to be like, wait, you're only evaluating that you cut this one tree over here. And even then it's kind of hard to get them to be really straightforward about what they're actually doing. So we couldn't get the very specifics on the logging projects. They would sort of vaguely discuss it, so there's that. But on top of that, everything else that they're doing is not included in the scientific evaluation of what is happening to that ecosystem. And that is a lot of missing data.
Right.
So, I mean, what are we doing about it? I mean, this is the next missing piece.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to bring it forward. We may be able to bring it forward because brush species also break up the wind flow, and they nourish the ground, so there's the fungal network that they're nourishing. But they also, you know, it may be that we can sneak it in terms of getting it part of the discussion, but I don't know how we're going to bring it forward. That's why I'm like, maybe I should contact the author.
Yes.
She might be able to help me.
Essentially, it's resistance by avoidance.
Yeah.
And absence of material. Or absence of taking this material into consideration.
Correct. And we have to be very careful when we bring these things forward, because there's a natural defensiveness that people in this industry have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of quietly label you the crazy conservationist, which I think I identify with that, actually. I'm like, yeah, okay. But the other scientists are legitimate scientists, and they should be listened to. But yeah, it's just not. It's not mentioned. It's really odd, because hundreds of miles of roads, that doesn't matter.
Right.
Of course it matters. So I don't.
And it changes everything.
Yes.
Yes, and all of those roads are ignition sites, right? So when they do a map, the scientists drew a map of all the potential ignitions in a forest area. It's just tracks right along where all the roads are. So if 9 out of 10 fires are caused by people and you're building hundreds of miles of roads, you're creating a problem.
Invitation to fire.
Right, out of season fire.
Right,
So,
exactly.
I mean, we have the lightning caused fires that happened in Sequoia, and that's natural. But they're also happening now closer towards the end of the season where we had the snow in the mountains and that kind of, tapped it down a bit. So, anyway,
Yeah.
we have a lot to overcome.
There is a lot.
Yeah.
And then we come back to that question of, and this is holy ground? And this is what we're doing to it? And I know you mentioned it in your story at the beginning, as did Erebus and Rossi, how much joy people have being out in nature. It just rejuvenates people. And Dr. Samora talks about that too in her book. That shows how we as humans are linked in this never-ending circle with all of nature. And we feel that connection. Even if we only feel it as we drive and we see a burned area, or we feel it deeply as someone like Deanna studying this, working to protect, learning new things, and approaching people about it. If one member of the community suffers, everyone suffers. And some of those community members are suffering to the point of extinction. There are strong similarities between forest communities and human communities. I know that I haven't considered that adequately in the past. Maybe you haven't either. But Dr. Simard's work points to the depth and the complexity of this underground network of forests, which she relates to faith. Faith, that unseen component of all that we hold as foundational. The reality of an underground network of carbon transmission and nutrient sharing, even communicating, has to be accepted by the vast majority of us non-scientists by faith. How can we do that in our age of scientific facts and hard data? So Dr. Simard, she's a groundbreaking researcher. Deanna is shedding light through her research and through her experience. Both of these women make it very clear that one doesn't negate the other. Faith is part of science, and science most definitely needs to inform our faith. And how else can we make sense of these fires except to lament the fact that we have discarded our sacred task, and we keep discarding that sacred task to actually steward the land? There's a difference. Indigenous people understand stewardship. Native tribes live consciously believing that every decision, every day, impacts the next 7 generations. Fire is not foreign to Indigenous people. In fact, they know how to respect fire so that it helps, and they steward the land along with the fire. The key, great that you mentioned it, is not prohibiting all fires, but to carefully allow, ignite, and tend those fires in order to reduce the risk and the dangers of devastating, uncontrolled wildfires. But there's not a whole lot of profit in stewardship. If we carefully observe this circle of life of which all of creation is a part, we're not managers, but we are actually stewards, protectors. Fire can be an ally. It's also part of this circle if we respect it, if we honor it, if we carefully are guided by it. A parallel to our inner lives comes when our own searing moments, our fires of sorrow, pain, loss, every hurdle, if we see that not as something to manage, but to honor, to respect, and in which to seek divine guidance. So, go ahead, take off your sandals. This is holy ground. There is hope. Dr. Simard invites us to reimagine what our part is in this network. It begins definitely in a place of observation and listening with humility. We're surrounded by these unseen networks, communities which predate us by thousands and thousands of years, grand systems made up of interrelated ecosystems. There's no bigotry in these relationships, as Deanna alluded to, only reciprocity. There is no scrambling for position, only sharing. We can become part of a strong network. We can become a part of a great strengthening, and that is holy ground. And that is what we heard from Deanna this morning. May this indeed change our lives.